Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Schools, Plainfield's a very large district. We have 30 schools. Is there something that we can do across the entire district to try and get more information out there for parents? And so when somebody approached me about it, I said, you know, that's a great idea. It's actually something I've been wanting to do for 2 years. Let's make this happen. And in doing so, we brought on some great parents and volunteers. And over the course of these now 4th year, in my opinion, we have brought on very great dynamic speakers that gave us as parents some really valuable information about the trials and tribulations of not only being a parent in today's society, but also being able to support our kids through the environment that they're growing up in. Father of 3 daughters, which is why I have no more hair. I can certainly relate to the struggles that are happening not only in our communities, but in our schools. We feel that this topic is very relevant for what we're seeing in the news and what is happening in our communities with our loved ones, our family members, and in our schools. So before I get too far into that, again, I wanted to be very thankful. We have some vendors that have helped us sponsor this event tonight. Rosecrans is here, Linden Oaks, and Plainfield Counseling Center are all wonderful sponsors of this event. In the future, if you want to find us, the best place to find us is on Plainfield Parent Community Network.org. On that website, you're going to be able to find every single one of the past 8, soon to be 9 events podcasted on that website. So if you missed something, good example, this time last year we had the overscheduled student. I got too many phone calls saying, you know, I really want to go to that, but I'm overscheduled. Well, that's the reason why you need to drop everything and come to this event. So we had, again, some very dynamic speakers. We had students that talked about their experiences and other clinicians that were able to give some good insights. So Plainfield Parent Community Network.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And then we also have a Gmail account at plainfieldpcn@gmail.com. This will be podcasted. It will usually take 2 to 3 weeks for us to get it on the website. In your program, there is a survey. It's very important to us that you take some time and review that survey. We go through each and every single one of them. It really helps us generate ideas for future presentations. So if you can, at the very end, complete that. If you're an educator, at the end, we have evaluations and CEUs and CPDUs for you to have. And then we also have translation services in Spanish. If you need that or are interested, you can find that at the back table over there. So at this point, I am sure that you are tired of hearing my voice. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Aaron Weiner, Ph.D. from Linden Oaks. He's the Director of Addiction Services at Linden Oaks Behavioral Health. He's a licensed clinical psychologist, member of the Board of Society of Addiction Psychology and the Science Advisory Board for Smart Approaches on Marijuana. He is passionate about educating both healthcare providers and the general public about the nature and treatment of addiction, helping medical teams to provide compassionate and competent care, and empowering patients to be informed consumers about their options. That's a very small snippet of what an amazing person that he is. So please help me welcome Dr. Aaron Weiner.
Well, good evening, everybody. I can say that I was not tired of the sound of Tim's voice. I don't know about you guys. I think he has a very sonorous, probably to radio. But I'm really glad to be here with you guys tonight. As he mentioned, I am the director of the Addiction Service line at Linden Oaks Behavioral Health. And so I have a very front row seat to a lot of what's going on right now in the drug world and the impact of different changes in industry and society and the substances themselves. And one of the reasons why I speak on this topic fairly regularly is that I've noticed that there is a dramatic difference between the narratives that are easy to find on the internet, that are easy to find just coming out of the students' mouths, and the information that we find in medical journals and the information that we find in government publications. And so what I'm hoping for tonight is to be able to offer you some of that information from the medical side, from the government side, as well as show you some of what's actually going on to try to help bridge that gap a little bit. So you can feel, after you leave here tonight, like you can have good, educated, thoughtful discussions about these topics with your children, with students, with anybody, particularly when you hear some of the alternative narratives that are all over the place in the news. So I think that there will be a lot of time at the end for questions. I definitely encourage you to ask them. I know that there's just so much flying around out there. So I'll be covering vaping and marijuana. Dr. Burke will be covering opioids, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions today. These are really important topics, particularly when they come to kids. So let's start with the basics. Start with the basics. There. All right. So e-cigs and vaporizers, what are these things? So at their core, they are devices to heat a substance to create a vapor. So, there it is, all right. So basically, if you're ever trying to get a substance out, or a chemical out of a substance, you've got to do it somehow. So you could say, eat it, and then your stomach acid breaks it down and gets absorbed through your stomach lining. You could smoke it, and what happens there is that you burn it, and when you burn it, that releases the chemical, and then it goes into your lungs. And you take it in and absorb it through there, or you can vape it. And the idea of vaping is that you are heating something high enough to release the chemical, but below the point of combustion. And that by doing that, you are saving yourself from some of the carcinogens that come when you burn anything. So, as an example, you're not supposed to eat burnt toast. You're not supposed to have barbecue that's overly charred, because whenever you burn something, it's not as good for you. And so the idea behind vaping is that, well, we're going to get the nicotine, or the THC, depending on what you're using, out of the product without having to light it on fire. And that's basically what vaping is. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some of them have these, let's see, do I have a pointer? I do not. Some of them have larger tanks like the one there on the right. Some, they come in different sizes and colors. We'll get to Juul in just a minute. Juul is just another type of vaporizer. So it's all the same general idea. Now the nicotine ones are generally structured this way. Where you've got on the bottom there, or if you look in the middle, you can see that the haft of a vape pen. So that's where the battery is. And either the on-off switch, or in the case of many, you inhale to complete the circuit and turn on the device. One thing that you'll notice near the bottom, though, is that on this one, there is a way to adjust the resistance. And if you think back to your high school physics, the lower the resistance, the faster something heats up. And this is one of the, whoop. All right, this is one of the customizable aspects of this. So we will come back to this point, but pretty much every type of drug has a subculture attached to it. And that's one of the big draws. Particularly when you're in high school, you want to be part of something, you're looking to form your identity, you don't want to feel on the outside. And the drugs have always been this great equalizer, where you don't have to be smart, you don't have to be funny, you don't have to be talented, you don't have to be attractive. You just have to put something in your body and you're part of the club. And so the culture aspect of this is huge. And there's a lot of ways to make vaping your own. And this is just one example. I'll talk quite a bit about these. Today. But that's just one of them. So as we go further up the device, you can see that if you look at the bottom, you can see there's that open chamber. Most e-cigs have either a refillable chamber, as this one does, or they have disposable pods, like Juul does. The difference is that you refill ones with a chamber. And so they are then titrated up by those wicks. You can see that there on the top. They draw that liquid up to that heating coil, where it's then heated up to that point of vaporization. You breathe in, and that's how you get your nicotine, or your flavor, if that's what you're thinking. So again, they all have these same general components. This is how they work. They just have different form factors that sometimes lead to different results. So those large ones are sometimes called mods, and mods tend to produce more vapor, which, if you want, that's appealing to you. You want to do vape tricks, for example, you might be more drawn to that. All right, so in terms of different types of vaping, wet and dry vaping are the two main types. Wet is for nicotine, dry is generally for THC. Now I say most of the time on this because all you have to do is go on YouTube and type in put THC in a joule and you will see how to put THC in a joule. They don't tell it from the website that way, but kids know how to do it. Students know how to do it. So you never really know what's in there unless you do a test for it. The THC devices that are designed for this, you can see the picture there on the right. The main difference is that there's a ceramic heating chamber as opposed to a place to put the liquid inside. So it's basically the same except you heat that substance up. What you're seeing on the bottom there are THC or cannabis concentrates. And these are they're about a quarter of the market in recreational states, which we know will be in January 1st. And if you've heard of dabbing, this is what, you take a dab of this concentrate, you put it on the heating coil or in the chamber, and that heats it up. And there's a number of issues with this. We'll talk about it in more detail in a little bit. But essentially, these concentrates can be up to 90–95% pure THC. And these things are the products that are the most associated with harm. And in the past, it was a lot harder to actually use these because you'd have to get a modified bong, usually actually heat up with a blowtorch or a butane torch. It was very challenging. But this really lowers the bar for entry because you just put it in the vape pen. So it makes it a lot easier for young people to use these substances, and there's consequences for that. So Juul. Let's talk about Juul. So Juul is the 600-pound gorilla in the vaping world. It is just another type of e-cig, but it's kind of like, it's like the Kleenex in the tissue world, and people say that they are Juul, right? Like you've probably heard that term at this point. It looks like this. At this point, I think we all kind of know what it looks like. It's like a flash drive, and it's very small. So like if this were a Juul, I could basically just fit it in my fist. And this is appealing to young people because then they can take a drag off of it without being seen. Either hold it in their lungs long enough for the vapor to dissipate or blow it out of the clothing as we head here into the colder season and into winter. And use it in eventually risky situations. There's actually, we've seen numerous cases of people actually videotaping themselves, taking videos of them doing this to then post on Snapchat or Instagram. It kind of like is a look what I can do sort of thing. But it's great for stuff that way. There are pods that you buy to put in. Each one costs about, I think, $4.25 individually when you buy them, and each pod contains about the same amount of nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. So it's highly concentrated, and they come in a bunch of different flavors. Christine, can you bring us over to the Juul webpage? I want to show you what it looks like to buy this. We'll pull it up in just a second here. So you can see that the bar for entry there is actually really low. It just costs $19 to buy a Juul, and 4 different pods that go along with it. And you can see that there's flavors that you get in this starter kit: mango, cream, mint, tobacco. You've probably seen in the news that certain places are now banning flavors. And we'll talk a little bit more about the vaping epidemic in a minute, but what's interesting about it is that there's actually 2 different vaping epidemics going on right now. One is the one that's putting thousands of people in the hospital and has killed 26. The other one is that youth are using this tremendous amounts. Some schools in our state, 1 out of 3 kids has vaped in the last month, which is getting them drawn onto nicotine and then actually onto cigarettes. Again, more on that in a minute. But it's creating this nicotine addiction trend in youth that we haven't seen for a very, very long time. So the flavor bans actually get more at youth, even though they've been introduced now because of the hospitalizations and deaths. So it's kind of like a misfire, but I'll take it. You know, like from a public health perspective, even if we're kind of addressing the wrong epidemic, we're still addressing one of the epidemics. All right, let's go back. Thanks, Christine. Thank you. Juul, though, really is dominating this market. So this is an older graph. I think I got it about a year ago. At this point, Juul is 75% of the vaping market. And for those of you who know what that means, like that is huge. That's like Amazon and everybody else online. Like they're an absolute juggernaut. And so where Juul goes, other people tend to go. Can we advance the slide, please? Thank you. We might have a little bit of clicker issues tonight, it seems. So Christine and I will just communicate if we have problems. And what's interesting about Juul is that they really tend to say one thing and then do another. So to give you an example, back in 2018, they said, we're going to throw $30 million against youth use, which kind of sounds like a lot, but actually for a national problem, it doesn't end up being that much. But at the same time that was going on, a few months later, the Truth Initiative, which is a nonprofit that looks at nicotine use for kids, found that 16 out of 17 Juul users are teenagers. And so if you think of the business of this, because again, Juul is a business, right? Vaping is a business. These are people who want to make money off of people using and getting addicted to their product. If 16 out of 17 people who uses your product is a teenager, what would actually happen if they stopped using your product? You go out of business. That just doesn't work. This actually has been the way that the addiction field has always functioned. 90% of all addictions start before you hit age 20. If you're going to have addictions to substances, you usually get going while you're a teenager. So if you are in the business of addiction, you have to target the young. That is your target. You can't say it, right? Because then you look like addiction profiteers who don't care about the health of children. But you do it. So you say one thing and you do another. And these guys are following the same formula. I don't know if you had, next slide please, I don't know if you saw this or were aware of this, but flavored cigarettes and cigars have been banned for 10 years. And the reason for this is that, so like the young people in the audience have probably never seen these things before. But they banned it because what we know is that young people are disproportionately attracted to flavored tobacco or nicotine products. And actually the same holds true right now. The Surgeon General recently released a report showing that 85% of young people say that they would not vape if it wasn't for flavors. Yet we banned this 10 years ago. And right now, the FDA still has not banned flavors in e-cigs. And states are now one by one having to do this themselves, either with permanent or temporary bans. You might ask yourself, why? Why would this be? If we know that 85% of young people who should not be using this for their health are doing it because of flavors, why haven't we done it? And the answer is money. And again, that is another driver of the addiction industry. The answer is money. I didn't find this out until maybe about 6 months ago, but the FDA has actually had the authority to do this for about 2 years to regulate flavors in vape, and they have not done it. And whenever things don't make sense, there's a reason behind it, and when it comes to politics, that reason generally is money. Next slide, please. So this is how Juul started. You might have heard them say a lot, like, we don't want kids to use our product, and even that's what their now former CEO recently said. But these were early vape ads for Juul. And if you look at it, and you look at these people, and you look at the colors, press me forward one more time, please. And you ask yourself, Christine, give me a dance one, please. And you ask yourself, do these look like 55-year-old chain smokers? Or do these look like high school kids more? The answer is it looks like young people, because again, this is always intentional, right? This is always intentional. I pulled these photos from a really great New York Times article called "Did Juul Lure Teenagers Into Customers for Life?" Highly recommend checking it out, but they really detail a lot of these behaviors. Some of which actually were also, the light was shown on them. If you could advance the slide, please. In a deposition that happened recently. Ninth graders testified that Juul went into their classroom and called their device totally safe. Totally safe. Actually, I don't have this picture in this slide deck, I really ought to, but Juul's behind, in the current vaping hospitalization epidemic, the products that have been used most frequently in those hospitalized are dead. The top one is a brand of THC vapes called Dank Vapes. The second most common substance used, Juul. They also spent $200,000 on social media influencers. And for those older folks in the room who aren't as familiar with their advertising trends, these are people on Instagram, Snapchat, etc., who have lots and lots of followers. Lots of people see what they post, and so they are paid to promote products. But you don't hire Instagram, social media influencers to promote products for 40-year-olds, because those aren't the people looking at those people, right? You're skewing young. So there's been a lot of this sort of behavior where they're saying one thing and doing another. If you could advance me to the next slide, please. So I don't know if you saw this as well, but in December of last year, Altria, the Altria group, bought a 35% stake in Juul for almost $13 billion. So if you go back to that $30 million health campaign thing, and you think, all right, well back a year ago, this company was worth $40 billion. $30 million doesn't seem like so much. And for those who are not aware, Altria is the makers of Marlboro. They make Marlboro cigarettes. They are big tobacco. And for the younger people in the room who don't know the legacy of this, big tobacco, people who sold cigarettes, are responsible for the currently 480,000 people who are dying every single year right now due to cigarette and tobacco use. They deceived the public for years. They pushed back against reports that cigarettes caused cancer. They are the epitome of, we literally will kill people to make money. And they bought a third of Juul. Now what was interesting about this was back when it happened, some of their employees weren't happy about it. They didn't want to literally sell out to big tobacco for reasons that might seem obvious to a lot of us. And so what happened the very next day, if you could advance me one please, Christine, is that every single worker, it's kind of cut off on the bottom, but every single Juul worker got a holiday bonus of $1.3 million the very next day. $1.3 million. And that's how this works, right? It's like, oh, so you have a problem that now we're owned by Marlboro. Well, why? Now you're a millionaire. Now you just got a holiday bonus of $1.3 million. How do you feel now? Yeah. Sit down, shut up, keep working. Right? We've got a good thing going. What's interesting about this as well is that one of the people from Altria, from Marlboro, is now the Juul CEO. Because the Juul CEO, during what's been going on with all these people dying right now, resigned. Now Altria has the CEO of Juul as well. These industries have a lot of crossover. We're going to talk quite a bit about this. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example also of how this works. So before that congressional hearing, where the ninth graders said that Juul came into their classroom, Juul topped $1 million in quarterly lobbying payouts. So that means that they were averaging about $4 million a year at the federal level for lobbyists. Again, when you ask why does the FDA do what they do, right? Let me tell you, public health is not spending $4 million to push back on Juul alone, right? And actually, the vaping industry group in America sued the FDA to delay the review. So this happened about, let's see, hard to see, back in August. So this was just like a couple months ago, when people first started getting sick. But they said, the FDA said, we need you to submit all of your products by May of 2020 for us to review their safety. And they have sued the FDA to say that that is not enough time. We need more time. While people are getting sick and dying. Because they want to delay that. Next, please. And this also, just as an FYI, one of the first places to ban vaping when things started going bad, just with young people. This is San Francisco. This wasn't even with the recent epidemic. They spent $4.3 million in San Francisco alone trying to fight against that. Because again, this is about money. All of addiction. Addiction is one of these really interesting paradigms in behavioral health, where people literally are selling the illness for profit. Like no one is selling depression, no one is selling anxiety, no one is selling trauma. But people are selling addiction. They want people to get there so that they make money off of it. It creates a very interesting dynamic within our field and within people struggling to get there. Next slide, please. So one other thing I want to mention before we get back more to the science and to the stats. What you may or may not have noticed, it was kind of small, was that on that party invitation, next please, you'll notice that the makers of PACs invite you to the Juul launch party. And for those of you who aren't familiar with PACs, next slide please, they are makers of THC vape pens, and they've been doing it for a long time, well before it was legal anywhere. And if you look at the PACs era, that looks a lot like a Juul. That's because that came before Juul. Juul was not like a bunch of people being like, you know what we need? We need to create a harm reduction strategy for, they were people literally making vape pens to use illegal products at the most harmful end of the spectrum with the oil. And they said, you know what we can do? We can bring this over to nicotine. And Juul is a spin-off company from PACs. that's where this came from. There's linkages all over the place, and honestly, we could probably spend an hour just talking about the money and the politics of vaping. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but it's really interesting when you dig in. All right, next slide, please. So, talking about vaping jargon, I mentioned that there's a lot of jargon that goes along. Let's go back. Thank you. So there's almost like a whole language, and actually, Christine, if we can go to that next tab, and I can send you, by the way, all of these websites, all of these slides if you'd like it. From arms to zero, and if you scroll down, what you can see here is there's like A, B, C, D, E, F. I mean, a whole language. It kind of reminds me a little bit about skateboarding, like, you know, back in maybe like the 80s, 90s, like a whole lexicon. So if you bring me back to our slide, please. This is a couple of terms that I do want to introduce you to, just so that you can follow along with this. The first is juice. So e-liquid or vape liquid is mostly known as juice. That's what you'll hear most young people refer to it as. It's what goes into the vape pen. The flavor and the nicotine. The throat hit is the feeling of the vape aerosol hitting your throat with the nicotine. Some people like it, some people don't, and you can actually customize the feel based on different characteristics of the vape liquid. And you can do vape tricks. So this is where the skill part comes in, right? If you're again, kind of like with skateboarding, right? There's different things that you can do within the paradigm that can impress your friends. So, Christine, if you bring us back to the next tab, I've queued up a couple of ones to show you, just to give you an idea of this if you haven't done it before. So, this one is the drop. All right, now you can pause it. Let's go to the next one. So, all the face holds coming right up. Next one, let's do the tornado there. So this is the tornado. Tornadoes. Oh, that's kind of cool. Okay, make tornadoes with name. All right, let's go to the next one. I think we're going to go maybe like 20 seconds on this last one. So go ahead and hit play. These are like the next generation of smoke rings. And I kind of like, it's kind of hard to see, but there's like a smoke like dribbling out of his left nostril. It's like, now, what's interesting about this is like, I don't look at this guy and be like, I want to be his friend. Like, I'm not like super drawn to that. But that's just the difference in generations, right? Some people look at that like, I want to do that, I want to learn how to do that, I'm going to watch this YouTube video, I'm going to do it, and it's going to make me popular in my peer group. And so this, again, there's a lot of ways to make this your own. There's a lot of ways to do that. And it's a way of belonging when you're looking to form identity. Let's switch back to this. And the last one is blend. So the blend is the different percentages of the types of bases that you use in e-liquid. And the two most common you're going to see are called PG and VG. And if you advance to the next slide, go a little bit further, we'll see it. PG stands for propylene glycol, and VG stands for vegetable glycerin. And propylene glycol tends to be thinner, have a stronger throat hit. If you're trying to simulate the feeling of actually smoking, that's generally the one that people prefer. Vegetable glycerin tends to be thicker, sweeter, can gum up your device a little bit more, and also creates more vapor though, so if you're looking to do vape tricks, you might add a little bit more that way. And you can decide again how much of each of these is in there. So if you turn this back over, Christine, we're going to look for a second at what it looks like to buy vape liquid, if you've never done this before. So if you bring us back to the website, let's go to that next tab. This is Vape Wild, the place where you can buy different vape liquids. And so if you look at them, they're their top sellers. And it's kind of a little hard to read, but it's like Prison Break, Constantinople, I think, Crashberry, hashtag winning. So again, so like when you look at these, Abyss, again, these are not marketed at older chain smokers. These are not, like when you think about who's attracted to this, it's probably not working professionals. And again, that's generally how these work. If you bring us over to the next tab, please, you can see what it looks like to actually buy one of these. And there's a lot of ways to get it customized. So this is a fruity one called Bear et al. And if you look, if you click on that, you can see you can customize the VG and the Ph.D. blend, right? So again, you can change how it feels in your throat, what it's like to use the product. And if you go to the next drop-down, you can also customize how much nicotine is in there. And it goes all the way from 0 up to 12. So a huge range of concentration as well. Lots of options, lots of flavors. Most of them, again, not marketed at an older demographic. All right, let's head back to PowerPoint. So it is particularly appealing to adolescents for a number of reasons. It is easy to conceal the use. Again, this is a big one. Low odor, no smoke. I think that we all at this point know that the bathroom, it's really very disconcerting to a lot of students that you basically can't go into a bathroom right now and not see people vaping, smell vaping, which is, by the way, an issue because secondhand vape aerosol does contain toxins and carcinogens, and we'll talk more about what those are in a minute. But if you're breathing that in, that is actively not good for you. And I know it's very difficult for schools to manage this because they don't necessarily want to lock down all the bathrooms, and they don't have the manpower to be monitoring everything. So it creates a very tricky circumstance. I do know, actually, that there is new to the market, basically like vaping smoke detectors, which you can put in bathrooms. I think they cost about $900 each, though, so they are not inexpensive. But it's something maybe to bring up. I don't know if the administration is considering it, but it might be a possible solution if that's something that you as parents are concerned about. My hunch, having a couple kids myself, not high school age yet, I know I would chip in to get a few for a school if it meant that there would be better security around that. But it's challenging. It's challenging. They've got this marketing advantage amongst other tobacco products because they can have flavors and the other products can't. And again, 85% of young people said they wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for flavors. So they're really milking this as far as it can go. One of the biggest things about Juul, in terms of my opinion of them, no matter what they say, is they continue to sell mango and fruit and cream and all of these flavors that aren't tobacco, even though we know that they appeal to kids. And that really is the bottom line. That really is the bottom line about flavors. We know that this indoctrinates people into nicotine addiction, and they continue to do it. And again, Juul looks like a flash drive. It's very easy to use. Next slide, please. So a quick word about background, the prevalence of this. It was invented in 2003 in China, came over to the US a couple years later, but it's usually produced over there. And a lot of people, I even read an article on this once that was defending the vaping industry, saying it's regulated, right? It's being regulated by the FDA. No, it is absolutely not. That's why they've asked for everything to be submitted by May of 2020. Because these things are created in China, where there are no regulations. You actually have no idea what's in them, really. The labels do not have to resemble what's on the inside. And that's one of the biggest issues here. There's a huge amount of variability. And adults tend not to use this. So only about 4%-ish of adults are currently using a vape device, and most of them are concurrently smoking. So it's not like, I know many of them say that they're going to use it maybe to transition off of, they're thinking about it like a harm reduction strategy. But the end result actually is that most of them don't end up doing that, and they just kind of use them interchangeably. That differs very much, though, from young people. And so we head to the next slide. These are some older statistics that I like to show because you can see the escalation. You can see e-cigarettes down there in the bottom left in high school. You can see them going up and up and up, and then down there, middle school, up and up, while many of the other types have been going down over time. And it's actually only gotten worse. If we go to the next slide, the most recent National Youth Tobacco Survey found that between 2017 and 2018, high school use rates went up by 78%, and middle school went up by 48%. 1.5 million more students. Now you can understand why if you're Altria, if you're Marlboro, you're like, oh yeah, this is great news. Let's get on this. This is exploding, right? We can make a lot of money off of this. But if you care about the health of young people, like many of us in this room do, about what their long-term health trajectory looks like, it's very concerning. If we go to the next slide, this is just, again, a double win for Altria and Marlboro. For the first time, literally in decades, you can see on the right there, that the high school and middle school smoking rates went up. For the very first time, because one of the things that we know from studies is that if you vape, you are more likely to start smoking cigarettes. So not only are they getting in on the most recent trend with young people and able to profit off of that, but this product drives people back to their first product. It is a win-win for them all around, right? This is like Best Buy learning how to survive in the era of Amazon and digital retailing, right? They're like, we have made the jump. It's great for them, but again, terrible if you care about cardiovascular health, long-term health, and other social implications of getting addicted to nicotine at a young age. Now let's go to the next slide, please. So why do you think people vape? There's a few reasons that you'll hear the most. The first is that they're perceived as healthier than regular cigarettes. Propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin are viewed as natural because technically speaking, they are not completely chemical in nature. It's interesting actually about this. So the current vaping epidemic actually, we at first thought it had to do with some sort of like an oil-based, like vitamin E fly around for a while. We thought it was an oil-based thing going on in the lungs. Now actually a recent study out of Mayo Clinic that's actually looked at the lung samples shows that, in their words, it looks like a chemical burn like mustard gas. But even though they're natural, that doesn't mean you should inhale them. I could give you a long list of things that are natural that you should not inhale. Pretty much like everything, actually. You shouldn't inhale even if it's natural. But this is actually something that you'll hear a lot. I know there was one parent who came up to me after a talk who was saying, like my daughter came up to me and said, look, Mom, propylene glycol has been approved for human consumption. And it's like, yes, that means eating it. That doesn't mean that it's been approved to inhale it. These are two very different things. And vapor sounds like water, right? When we talk about vaping, it brings up these images, these ideas, these pictures of like water vapor in flavor, right? How bad could that be? For smoking cessation, it's easy to change dosages, and this is one driver. So you saw from that website that you can go from 12 to 10 to 8 to 6 to 4. It's easy to do. Some people are drawn to that. Next bullet, please. And for adolescents, again, there are flavors that are very attractive to them that bring them. I'm forgetting where this came from, but there was another survey that found that another very common response to why do you do it was that it looks cool. And again, if you think back to the trends, for some people, that really is a draw. For others, no. Next bullet, please. And as mentioned, entry into a social group right now. All right, next slide, please. So what we know, stop right after 3 there. So I want to talk a little bit, I know it's small, I'll give you the cliff notes, but about the science. This is the part that can be a little bit dry, but I think it's important. I get my information, again, from peer-reviewed medical journal articles, government publications, but I really like the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, or NASA for short. What these guys do is they aggregate huge amounts of research to draw conclusions based on strength. And this is really important because in today's media, in today's way of consuming knowledge, we tend to sensationalize individual studies, and it can lead to like snapping in one direction. So, like for example, you might remember for a while there, like people were saying like coconut oil, cook everything in coconut oil, and everyone was cooking things in coconut oil, and then like maybe 3 months later, people were like, no, saturated fat is saturated fat. And then it was like agave. It's like everything should be in agave because it's got this low glycemic index. But then, like a few months later, it was like, maybe. Or eggs. I feel like we've been going back and forth on eggs for like 50 years about whether or not they're going to kill you or they're good for you. And so, individual studies don't make things true. They come out, people go in Dr. Oz, everyone thinks it's real, but it's not actually how it works. You have to replicate it. To put it another way, if you click a coin 8 times and it comes up heads 8 times, that does not mean that you have a weighted coin, right? And that's how research works too. So it's really important, particularly in this topic, where we have a lot of competing narratives, some that are advanced by industry for profit, that we're very discerning about where we get our data from. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine? Yes. Reddit? Probably not, right? So we gotta be discerning. So here's what we know. There is conclusive evidence that in addition to nicotine, there's a lot of toxic substances in there. There is substantial evidence that it contains metals, and we're not sure whether or not these metals are coming from the liquid, the devices themselves, or the way those devices are used. If essentially like a coil is flaking. We don't know, we haven't been able to determine that. And there's substantial evidence that the chemicals present are capable of causing DNA damage and mutagenesis. And that is the thing that causes cancer. So actually, I just saw this come out in the news yesterday. There's finally been one study that directly shows a link in rat models between vaping and cancer. But for the most part, we don't have those things, and we don't have them in humans because we don't have, it hasn't been 30 years yet, right? They've really only risen to prominence more recently. But we do know that vaping causes the thing that causes cancer. So give it some time, we'll get all the way there, right? But that's where we are right now. Now, how does it do this? If you go to the next slide, please. So this study out of Berkeley lab found 31 toxic chemicals in e-cigarette vapor. 31. There's just a few of them over there on the right. You might notice formaldehyde there, 3 down. For those of you who have not dissected the frog yet, that is embalming fluid. It is also present in cigarettes. What's interesting, actually, is that formaldehyde might be like.
So we had people who were unscrupulous who would give people more and more of those pills. Pill mills. If you came in with cash, you can get as many pills as you want. The other side of it was you could doctor shop. You could go to different doctors and get the same medication so that you could have the dose that you needed for your pain relief. Well, there were certain places around the country that were peddling prescription pain pills more than their whole community. West Virginia was one of those places. West Virginia is a coal mining town. I'm from Pennsylvania, so it sits in the mountains. It's under-resourced. It's a poor community now because the coal mining industry kind of tapped. People have injuries from that industry. There was a pharmacy in one of those towns that was selling enough pain medication to have every person in that town have a prescription for a year. Okay. The DEA says, whoa, that's a red flag. I don't think that's right. And the problem with the DEA is they weren't paying attention up until this point, until it got so bad that they started to have to say, okay, ding, 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 something's wrong. Because they monitor when too many pills go to a certain pharmacy. When too many pills are being prescribed, they're supposed to go check it out. Well, they started checking things out. The problem with checking physician offices is that physicians don't like when the DEA messes with their work, right? The DEA at that time, in the 2000s, were still rough and tumble, law and order folks, right? The doctors are saying, stay on my business. I'm the doctor, don't tell me what to do. So rather than have them threaten their license and their ability to be able to prescribe that medication, the individuals who they thought might be a problem, they stopped seeing them. They shut their doors. They called them pill seekers. And they said, I'm not going to take care of you anymore. Go somewhere else and be taken care of. Well, unfortunately, what should have happened was that they needed to help that person withdraw from that medication or refer them to treatment. Because you can't just stop taking a pain medication that you've taken at that level for a long time. So when people no longer were able to get their pain medication, they went to the street. And our drug dealers are business people. They're right there, handing it out free. Try this. Back in the day, you had to shoot heroin in order to try it for the first time. You don't have to do that anymore because it's very pure. So you can snort it. Snort cocaine. This must be okay. I'll try that. And it took care of the pain. So people started buying heroin on the street. The problem with buying heroin on the street, it doesn't have any labels. It doesn't have a dose. It doesn't tell you how to take it. So it's a crapshoot. When you take it, you don't know how much is in there, you don't know how pure it is, and people started dying from overdosing on heroin. That's when the alarm was sounded in most communities, because this was not normal. When we saw that we had a heroin epidemic, we started trying to figure it out, and that's when you saw people reacting to it. But we've even transitioned to another wave of the opioid epidemic, the third wave. The third wave of this epidemic is the synthetic opioids. Heroin you grow in the fields or poppies, and you have to farm them, you have to cultivate them, you have to pull them, you have to process them, you have to get them to market. That's an expensive process. Fentanyl, or synthetic opioids, you make in the laboratories. You can make in the lab whatever you want, and then you can ship it which is what the Chinese do. It's so small, you can ship it easily. And they figured out how to get it into this country without being suspected. They were shipping it through our US postal system. Because our US postal system had not figured out how to screen for that. FedEx and UPS, they checked all of the packages, but not our system. We had a gap. And they found it, and they figured it out. So the synthetic opioids, because of their strength, are very, very dangerous. And if you have a low tolerance and you use that synthetic, you use fentanyl, chances are you're going to overdose. So there's the three ways. Now what I want you to remember is this is a pattern of abuse that starts way back when we have a medication that was told it was good for one thing, we were lied to about its effects, and we progressed, and we did not offer people the care and the treatment they needed in order to withdraw from that. Can I have my next slide, please? So this is Will County. In 2012 is when we saw a big jump in heroin deaths, and that's when the alarm went out. And that's when the county, through Larry Walsh's office, said, we have to do something about this. This is not acceptable. I mean, people are losing their children. So we did education. That was our first strategy, was harm reduction through education. We started to see a little drop because the people were starting to talk about it. I used to sit around at any group I was in, and especially if you're sitting up with a group of moms, and you say, did you know heroin's a problem? And they're looking at you like, you are crazy, lady. And I'm like, no, it's back. And it's in our suburbs. It's not in the city, it's in the suburbs. And it's very, very scary. So we saw it drop. Then in 2015, we started to see it rise. And then 2016, 2017, that's that big jump. And we saw it. In 2018, we kind of leveled out. However, this year I'm worried. I'm worried because of the 12 deaths because of the cocaine mixed with fentanyl. 68 deaths in only October. So I thought we were going to come at least flat again this year because we've put things in place to help. But one of the things I've been told is that the reason that there had been an infiltration of fentanyl in cocaine, because they're two different kinds of drugs, is because the drug dealers use the same equipment. Okay, it's sloppy. They're making bricks of fentanyl and heroin, and then they make bricks of cocaine on the same equipment. That's how it's getting into the other types of drugs. Next slide, please. The other thing that we saw, and that we were able to track, but we only got this information recently, is how many pills were being sent to the pharmacies. This is what was happening in Will County. New Lenox, Plainfield, Joliet, Romeoville had the most number of prescription pain medication distributed in the community. When we talk about the number of overdose deaths, there you go. New Lenox was first. New Lenox came in right on top. Plainfield, Joliet, and Romeoville. Now Joliet has surpassed Plainfield, but Plainfield has a lot of people in it. So the larger your population, the more chances are you're going to have a larger population of overdoses. And Romeoville's right behind that. What you see is that it's more of an urban situation for us right now. Except Wilmington, that corner of our community, Grundy County, had a huge problem. Could I have the next slide, please? So we know that opioids, the problem with opioids, is really starts because of the misuse of pain medication. But what leads some people to keep going and develop an addiction to anything? There are risk factors, and this is what's important for parents to understand. The risk factors are what you need to pay attention to when your children are young. The first risk factor is genetics. If you have any addiction in your family, that means substance use, that means gambling, that means eating, that means porn, any kind of addiction. It's all the same part of the brain. it can transfer to a different type of addiction. But you are 50% more likely to develop that addiction if it's in your family. So I encourage all of you that if you have people in your family that have an alcohol use disorder, you know, in the Irish families, we look at alcohol as a means of celebration. And we don't look at it as a problem. Even obviously when people are struggling with that problem. It's just our culture, right? It's not good not to explain to your children that the funny uncle that keeps falling over people during our celebrations has an alcohol use disorder. That he can't manage the ability to drink, and that you, as a descendant of that family tree, may have that same disease. Because when kids go off to college and they start drinking and they start binge drinking, they need to know that they might not respond to the alcohol as the same way that their friends do, because they have a genetic predisposition. The second risk factor is mental health. If someone has an undiagnosed depression, bipolar disease, or anxiety disorder, those are the three biggies that are self-medicated with opioids. That also increases your risk that you may develop an addiction because you're self-medicating to feel better. The third is environment. Now, the environment sounds simple. It's not simple. In fact, more research has gone on to understand what your environment does to you. Environment is access, right? If you live in a home that people are using, your brother or sister or somebody from college has access to drugs, there's more likely chance that you're going to use. If you live in a community that has easy access to drugs, it's more likely that you're going to have access to it and you'll use. If you run with a social group, if your friends are using, more likely you're going to try. But the really key is trauma. Adverse childhood experiences, as you grow up, will affect how your brain is formed and how you respond to the environment and how you self-medicate as you get older. So, what we do know through the Kaiser Permanente study is that there are 10 types of trauma that people undergo when they're growing up, that if you have 4 or more of those, you are more likely to be incarcerated or develop a substance use disorder. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, any kind of, if you have a parent who leaves, divorces, or dies. If you have a parent that has a mental illness, if you have a parent that's incarcerated, if you have a situation that is not healthy, it will affect the way your brain works, and it affects the way you respond to the world. So let me give you an example. If you have a parent who has an alcohol use disorder, and they're a mean user, right? When they drink, it's not fun. They're really nasty. And so when that parent goes out and drinks and comes home in that case, trouble, right? Trouble. You know it. As a kid, you know there's going to be trouble. So the parent walks to the door, slams the door, and that's the cue to that child that there's trouble. Children even respond by flight. They run up to their rooms and they hide because they don't want to be involved with this. They're afraid. Or fight. Sometimes older kids will stay and protect that other parent because they know there's abuse that's going to go on. Or now we know they freeze. Kids don't know what to do. They don't understand what's going on and they just freeze. In those situations, your brain programs that response. Those emotions are programmed into your brain. So let's fast forward. You're sitting in school. The wind blows in the school door slams. That child then experiences the same type of traumatic feelings they did when the parent walked in the door drunk and abusive. Even though it's not the same situation, their brain is telling them, run, fight, hide. Sometimes we think about kids who misbehave in school and we think they're a disciplinary problem. Often they just need to relearn responses to behaviors that they learned as they were growing up. That type of background is very significant when we're talking about addiction. And we learn more and more and more about it. And it makes sense, right? We also know that people who come back from the wars, our vets, are struggling with addiction because of the trauma that they experienced overseas. Next slide, please. So what is a substance use disorder? What is addiction? First of all, it's a medical disease, okay? It's not a personal failure, it's a medical disease. And there is no debate about that. Your brain is an organ, just like your heart. It grows, it has certain chemical reactions, and it's a brain disease when you develop an addiction. It's characterized by chronic relapse, meaning when you have an addiction, it's a lifelong disease. It doesn't go away. You have to manage it the rest of your life. You have a compulsive need to keep using that drug regardless of the consequences. You might know that you're going to go to jail if you get caught with that drug, but your brain is telling you the most important thing for you is to have that drug, regardless. So when we threaten people with jail to keep them off drugs, it doesn't work. It's not effective at all, because the brain wants the drug. It doesn't care what the consequences are. That's why people overdose, because it doesn't care. They need that drug. Otherwise, they're going to go into withdrawal. They're going to be extremely uncomfortable, very sick. And most people I know who have an opioid use disorder spend most of their time avoiding being sick. Not getting high, not euphoria, but not being very, very, very sick in withdrawal. Addiction is similar to other diseases like heart disease. When you have heart disease or you have diabetes, those are chronic illnesses. They don't go away. They need to be managed. So if you're diabetic and you need to manage your diet, you need to manage your exercise, and you might take insulin, if you stop taking that insulin, you're going to be very sick. You have to manage that disease the rest of your life. Addiction is the same way. If you have an opioid use disorder, you have medical-assisted treatment. Suboxone, Vivitrol, methadone. That helps you cope with the disease. It's not a substitution. It's a medically assisted management of that disease. If you have heart disease, how many people have high blood pressure? And when they take their medicine, they start to feel better. And then they go off of it because they think they're better. But it's the medicine that's helping them stay feeling good and keeps their blood pressure. So we need to stop thinking about addiction as separate from the medical world and realize it needs to be treated in the same way that other chronic diseases are. Next slide. So one of the things that I do is I teach people how to use Narcan, naloxone, which is the antidote to a drug overdose. I'm not doing that today, but I wanted to tell you what happens when someone has a drug overdose. So if you take too many opioids and you have too many on your receptors, your brain stops telling you to breathe. What are the risk factors for that happening? The first one is if you mix drugs. So alcohol is a depressant. So a lot of people who, when they're using drugs, are using are drinking. Those two combinations are dangerous. But also, if you use benzodiazepine, if you're taking Xanax, and Xanax is being used and it is misused just as frequently these days as an opioid. Anxiety is a huge issue, and for some reason, Xanax is the drug that's being overprescribed, and you combine that with an opioid, and your body is made shut down. The other risk factor for having an overdose is if you use alone. Some people have a problem with this. It's a harm reduction strategy. If someone is not in recovery yet, and they're using, we want them to be safe. So we want them to have Narcan. So that if they overdose when they use, someone is right there beside them to use the Narcan. If you're a family member, you have someone in your home who has an opioid use disorder, you want to have that Narcan there. We tell people all the time, don't use alone, because if you overdose, nobody's going to find you. Some people don't like that. I want to keep people alive until they can get into care. So never use alone. The third, and this is the one that's really tricky, is reduced tolerance. Remember, as you take more and more pain medication, your tolerance goes up because you need more and more. Well, when you went to treatment, or you're incarcerated, or you're in the hospital, and you're not taking those drugs, your tolerance goes down. It goes down pretty quickly. What happens when people have this disease and they relapse and use the same amount they used before they went into treatment. That's a higher dose, and they overdose because their tolerance is too low. So when the 2 weeks post-treatment and post-incarceration are dangerous times. We need to get Narcan in the hands of every single person who has an opioid use disorder, gets discharged from treatment as well as jail. Next slide, please. So I just want to tell you about why I can teach Narcan and why you can all have Narcan. It's because of the Good Samaritan law. Originally, in 2000, when they passed the Good Samaritan law, was because people were letting people die, especially if they were using substances that were illegal. They didn't want to call for the 911 because they were afraid of being arrested. And they were being arrested. They were being arrested in the emergency rooms. No one who calls 911 to help someone save a life should be arrested. It's against the law. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It means you might be taken to jail, but the judge will throw it out. Good Samaritan law also allowed people like me to train first responders. So police are there on the scene often first. Every minute counts when it comes to an opioid use disorder. When someone is overdosing, they're not breathing. You want the first person there to have the Narcan and not wait for the ambulance. So we've trained all the police officers in Will County. The third part of that is that you and I can be trained to use Narcan, regardless of, we don't have to be a medical person. We can buy it. You have to have a prescription. But now, the state of Illinois has an umbrella prescription where you can go into any pharmacy and you can ask for Narcan. In most cases, your insurance will cover it. Or you can come to my classes and you're covered under that prescription, and I give people Narcan when they come to my classes. So it's a harm reduction strategy that needs to be available in order to reduce the deaths. It's to get rid of people dying. It's not to give people free things, it's to stop the death. That little Narcan spray is what naloxone looks like. It's so easy. It's so easy to use, and so worthwhile being trained so you can use that and save life. Next slide, please. So, recognizing that prevention is the most important strategy that we can emphasize to avoid an opioid use disorder. Here's your checklist. Here's the things I want you to think about. Take exactly the medication that you're prescribed. Don't adapt it. Don't misuse it. Don't take more. Don't keep it around for the next time your back hurts, okay? You need to get rid of it. Dispose of it. If you don't take all of it, dispose of it. And Will County, you go on the Will County website, and they have locations where you can dispose of it safely. When you're using it, store it in a locked cabinet. It's the same thing. Lock your alcohol, lock your drugs. Because people come into your home, and you don't know who has this disease. You think you know your friends, you think you know your kids' friends, you don't. Lock it up. Because that's where people get it first. That's where kids get it first, in the cabinets of other people's houses. So lock it up. Count your pills. Make sure you know how many you have in a bottle, and they're not just disappearing. Because you forgot, right? If you're on a medication, you're taking it, you don't count them. Make sure you know how many are in there. If they start disappearing, there's a problem. And when you don't need them, get rid of them. You don't need to store them. You don't need to keep them. Go back to your doctor. We have enough medical quick clinics if you have a problem to be able to go and get your medication. You don't need to keep it in the house. That's safety. That's prevention. Next slide, please. So this is where I get my information. If you have any concerns about opioids, you can go to the Illinois Department of Public Health. There they have a health opioid data dashboard, which tells you where all the opioid deaths are taking place and what's happening in the community. The Department of Human Services for Opioid Resources has a lot of information and resources for you on that site. And then our opioid overdose map, which is on our website and will come, is also there as a resource to all of you. I think that's it. Next slide. Thank you very much, and we're going to have some questions and answers, but if there's any other questions that you have, please open.
Thank you so much. Okay, so here's your chance. If you want to stick around, the Hidden in Plain Sight trailer will close in 20 minutes if you want to do that. Otherwise, we have pens in the back if you want to raise your hand. If you have a note card, we'll have both of our presenters up here to answer any questions. If you want to move forward, you can do that. And we'll begin the question Q&A here momentarily.
Can you hear me? Hey, there we go. Hi, my name is Scott Sylvester. I actually walk the path here that parents are trying to stop their kids from experiencing. And what I found is the number one thing that my school failed me with was teaching me courses on how to deal with my emotions. So I wanted to ask you guys, are there resources that you can offer these parents on how to help their kids deal with emotions better? And how can we get things like acceptance and commitment therapy in schools?
It's a really good question. Yeah, so off the top of my head, really good question. So when we talk about where does addiction start, it really does start with coping. How are you dealing with your life? And particularly, I feel like recently, even more so than in the past, it's been walking further and further back. I feel like as children have been seeping more and more into technology, maybe even more so now than when you were a child, I feel like we've been moving further and further away from experiential ways of coping with emotions and instead moving into different ways to avoid them out of distance. So a couple thoughts about things that we can do. One is there is a very useful course called Mental Health First Aid. I know it's something that we teach at Linden Oaks fairly regularly that will help teach parents what to look for in terms of signs of behavioral health disorders, addiction or otherwise, so that they can recognize that. I mean, goodness, the idea of like how to train parents is a very broad field. What comes to mind about substances specifically is there's a model called CRAFT, community reinforcement, and family something. I'm forgetting the whole thing, but it's a very good technique there as well. What I say, lastly, you mentioned ACT, so acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a very useful therapy for a number of different conditions. It's transdiagnostic in a way. I think that it's very useful if you have not seen a therapist and you have insurance to try it out, or an EAP, to see what they have to say, because I think a lot of people don't understand that it's not just like having a friend. Like we actually go to school for, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I went to doctoral school for 6 years, and then another year before I got my license. And it's not just about sitting and listening. There's a lot of science behind what we do. ACT is one that's very, very effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy is another. Dialectical behavioral therapy is another. Starting to learn what some of these coping skills are and how to pass those along to your children is key. And I will do one plug, and I don't know if Dr. Burke wants to speak to this as well, for meditation. Because meditation actually is one of the most, again, that word transdiagnostic, so useful for a number of different conditions. Interventions that you can do for depression, for anxiety, for trauma. It's very useful, particularly mindfulness meditation, which is aspiritual, so it doesn't necessarily move you. It's all about being very present and observing yourself so that you can be aware of when you're being swept away by thoughts. You can observe when you're being swept away by emotions and can choose where you go from that point. And it's something actually we've got data on it being taught to kids. as well for self-regulation effectiveness for them and adults. I'm also going to do a plug just personally. It's not what Linden Oaks recommended. This is what Weiner recommended for Headspace. It's a really good app you can get on your phone or a tablet. 10% Happier is another good one that teaches very strong science-based basic meditation techniques. And I think at least 10% Happier actually has modules for children. So they're free to start. Check them out.
The only thing I want to add is that kids know what's going on, and they need to tell people. They need to tell the adults when they feel that there's a friend who's in trouble, and not be afraid of that, because that's the most dangerous time. Kids know their friends. They know they can pick it up faster than an adult can. So encourage your kids to let some adult, doesn't have to be a parent, it could be an adult at school, social worker, teacher, coach, let an adult know if there's something going on. The other thing for parents, there is no shame in mental health problems. There is no shame in someone being depressed. There is no shame in having an anxiety disorder. These are all physical illnesses that need to be managed. And unfortunately, we've decided that behavioral health is the stepchild to medical health, and that we can't do it because, God forbid, our neighbors know what's going on, right? Well, that's a bunch of bunk, because if you want your kids alive, give them a healthy childhood, and they'll be healthy adults. And I know the schools struggle with trying to staff the social workers, trying to support everybody. They're in a bind too. Don't depend just on the school. There are resources in your community. Ask for resources at the health departments if you need help. There are reduced fees. You do never have to not get care because you can't afford it.
Yeah. I'll just add a little bit to that from the district perspective. We are one of the, if you're in Plainfield, we're a very fortunate district in that I really appreciate the question because I think it's relevant for us across the board. We were very fortunate to be able to hire 20 additional social workers across our 30 schools. So that was huge. You're not going to see that anywhere around here, so it was a huge win for us, thankfully for Dr. Averill, our superintendent, and our school board to make that happen. We've also done a number of other things, bringing in a program called Referral GPS that we can, if parents are reaching out to their school social workers or counselors, they can actually directly connect families based on their insurance, the type of provider, social worker, counselor, psychologist, the type of counseling they're looking for, the distance they're willing to go, the languages, all these kinds of things that we now have, and all of our social workers, counselors, and psychologists have. We're also bringing in curriculum. So there is a lot of, in my opinion, very good things our school district is doing, and I think surrounding districts are recognizing the significant need of those social emotional learning standards that need to be taught in classrooms.
It's worth mentioning. I just saw an article actually a day or two ago. It was published maybe more like a week or two, but that actually in terms of mental health concerns, high-achieving kids now are like even with disadvantaged youth because of all the pressure that they feel that they're under to achieve. Like it's shocking how much pressure we put on our kids these days. So I guess I've had two questions. I will take these now, and then if anyone has any, I can do those. So one is, where are we at with CBD purity testing? Do we have unified testing? What's the deal with CBD? I haven't really talked much about CBD tonight, so I will address it briefly. So CBD, or cannabidiol, is the non-psychoactive component of cannabis. So cannabis actually is an umbrella term for multiple plant types. The two most common that we talk about are marijuana and hemp. Marijuana is generally high in THC and, I want to use my other hand, low in CBD. Hemp is the opposite. It's very high in CBD and low in THC, generally. And so actually the CBD products that you can buy all over the place, generally speaking, come from hemp. However, they are supposed to have no more than 0.3% THC in them. One of the issues is that labeling and accuracy and purity standards for those products is all over the map, hence this question. The downer news I have for you is I have no idea. So the actual question, I cannot necessarily answer that one for you.